event. Just one quick note about our forthcoming event. Next Thursday, we will be having a presentation of Professor Yuliia Iliukh's dictionary. And we have guest speakers flying in that will be discussing it. So this will be next Thursday. Please check our website for more information about that. You're welcome to come to that. Today, we have an event entitled My Women in Conversation with Ukrainian writer Yuliia Iliukha. And also present, in addition to Yuliia, is Hanna Leliv, who has translated the book that you see in front of you here. Yuliia Iliukha is a Ukrainian poet, a writer, and journalist. She is the author of two novels, The Eastern Syndrome and Zero, short story collection The Skycatchers, Teach Me to Dream, and the poetry collection Graphomaniac Poems, and thus Let's Say Ahornblatt, and several children's books. Her poetry and prose have been translated into English, German, Italian, Bulgarian, Hungarian, Catalan, Polish, Swedish, Portuguese, and French. Iliukha has received many awards, including 128 Litz 2023 International Chapbook Prize. She is a writer in residence at Internationales Haus der Autorinnen in Graz, Austria. Since 2014, when Russia released war against Ukraine, she has been actively involved in volunteering. Together with her friends, she assembled over 500 individual tactical medical kits for Ukrainian soldiers. And like I mentioned, joining us is Hanna Leliv, who is a literary translator working between Ukrainian and English. She was a Fulbright Fellow at the University of Iowa's Literary Translation MFA program, and mentee at the Emerging Translator Mentor Program run by the UK National Centre for Writing. Hanna has been collaborating with a range of Ukrainian and international publishers. Last year, she was a translator in residence at Princeton University, and currently she is at Harvard University. So please welcome our guests too. So tonight, our guests will talk about how the book came about, how they worked on it. They'll do readings both in Ukrainian and English from the book, and then we have a chance to ask some questions, have a discussion, and we also online, so people that are watching online can also write questions to me, and I will read them out loud. So welcome, and tell us about this project.
First of all, thank you so much for the introduction, Nicole. Thank you so much for having us here. It's an honor for us to be here today and to present this book, My Women, which is fresh off the press. It came out in the US just on October 1st. Just a few words about how this project came about. Actually, Yuliia and I have known each other since 2018, for the past 6 years, when Yuliia put together an anthology of Ukrainian veteran poetry. It was a bilingual anthology titled Tam do Doma, or in English translation, The Mark of Home. And I translated this poetry collection into English. So that's how we collaborated. I was in Lviv, Yuliia was in Kharkiv. That was really a powerful book. Just a couple of weeks ago, I picked it up again, and I was really taken aback by the very fact that two of these poets whose poetry was published there have already been killed by Russia, and all the rest are still fighting on the front line, which I think tells a lot about the state of and the mission of Ukrainian literature today, and the new role that Ukrainian poets have taken up since the war started in 2014 and up until today. So then after this, we were working on different projects, and then in spring 2022, when the Russian full-scale invasion started, Yuliia left Kharkiv with her young son, and she was documenting her experiences on Facebook. And later on, she started writing these small flash fiction stories about the experiences of women, of anonymous women. But the stories had this, felt very poignant and had this, deep resonance. I think many women could recognize their experiences in what Yuliia wrote. So one day I just texted Yuliia and asked, is someone translating these pieces into English? Because if not, I would like to do that. And Yuliia said, no, go ahead. So I translated a few stories and I placed them in Anglophone journals so that, to spread the word to much wider audience. And somehow, story after story, I translated all 40 of them. Then two of the stories were published in New York-based literary magazine 128 Lit. And later that year, this magazine ran a chapbook competition, which Yuliia's book has won. So that's how it came to be that this month his stories were published as a collection in English by 128 Lit Press in New York, and this is the first book for this publisher, and we are so grateful that the publisher believed in this book, and and that now it's available in English. So far, this book has been translated into other European languages: French, Lithuanian, Swedish, Italian, Slovak, German. Yeah. So it was published or is forthcoming in Europe as well. But it's the first time that Yuliia and I met in person here on Saturday when we had book launch in New York. So I would just like to read two short reviews for the book collection before I give the floor over to Yuliia. The first one is by Ilya Kaminsky. This woman buried her son in a vegetable patch. Here is a book that makes music of conscience, that finds rhythm in a time of fear, that offers language in a silence after air raids and builds a raft of words to try to sail out of the bombed-out city. How do we sail out of bombed-out cities? By air, by feet, by digging underground tunnels? I don't know. The war that some say is going on for 2 years now. The war that some say is going on for decades now. The war that some say is going on for centuries now. That war is here. And so is this bit of music wrapped in words, offering us a rhythm we can breathe to, set our days to, and for that I'm grateful. And Ainsley Morse says this: through poetic vignettes narrated by anonymous women, Yuliia Iliukha creates a strikingly multifaceted and intimate portrait of the experience of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. These highly individual snapshots are painfully rich in visceral and immediate detail, while following the large-scale political drama of the war as documented and reported in the media. Evocative work by Svetlana Alexievich, such as The Unwomanly Face of War, Iliukha's stories quite literally bring the war home, as she writes of her women. Now they are yours too. And I should also mention that the publication of this book had some very tangible impact, and Yuliia and I are very glad that it was possible. So the honorarium for the publication of the book, the prize that we were awarded for the chapbook competition, $1,000, was donated to the military unit in which Yuliia's husband was serving at the time, which I think is important, what matters the most. So the floor goes to you, Yuliia, and I think it would be great if you could share your experience of how this book came to be and what brought you to it.
Thanks, Hanna, for the introduction. Thanks to all of you for coming. Well, I can say, as Mr. Felsher knows, the director of the film 20 Days in Mariupol, I wish I had never written this book and just had my normal, boring life in Kharkiv, the city which is very close to the Russian border. Before the full-scale invasion, Kharkiv had a population almost 2 million people. It was a big industrial center, but not only industrial. Also, Kharkiv was a cultural and literature center in Ukraine. I lived in the neighborhood called Northern Saltivka, Pivnichna Saltivka, and this neighborhood was the closest to the border with Russia. And as many Ukrainians, at 24th of February at 5 o'clock in the morning, I woke up because I heard explosions behind my window. And when I asked my husband what was happening, he answered me that the war had started. Then I quickly picked up some stuff for my son, some clothes, and we had only 2 small backpacks with all our things. And for me, I had there only 2 pairs of underwear. And also we had a cat, so we had 2 backpacks and a carrier with a cat. And we took our stuff and went outside with my son, with my husband and our cat. And there was panic everywhere because nobody understood what was happening, and we were lucky to catch a trolley bus. And when we were riding on it, somebody told that this trolley bus was the last one because after it Russian tanks would come. Yeah, and that day I left Kharkiv with my son, with my cat, and went to my parents' house in the countryside, and my husband stayed in Kharkiv to defend the city. And later on, after some days, I left my son with my parents and came back to Kharkiv because at that moment it was very important to help Ukrainian army, Ukrainian soldiers, and I had such experience in my past because I was collecting tactical aid kits for Ukrainian soldiers since 2014. And with my friend, she is a doctor, we packed about more than 500 of them, and I know that at least 3 of them saved people's lives. So I came back to Kharkiv to sort and to collect some medications which my friends from abroad sent me for Ukrainian army, because at that time it was panic still everywhere, and nothing worked, no pharmacies, no supermarkets, and no public transport. And I lived in a basement with my friends, and I was sorting medication at the daytime and slept in the basement at night. Later on, during summer, I got an invitation from writer's residency in Austria. And I decided to go there only for several months, because at that time we still were very naive and still believed that the war would have stopped in several months. But we still live in Austria with my son, and the war in Ukraine is going on. And one evening I was sitting in Austria, in the city of Graz, at my temporary home. And suddenly I wrote a short prose story about a woman who was afraid of taking bus and going to bed naked. And I immediately posted it on my Facebook page. Still have such a bad habit to publish my poetry on Facebook and so on. And next morning I realized that this small story got a lot of reactions from Ukrainians, and mostly from women. And women commented that they could recognize themselves in the woman who was the main character of my story. Because it's a very common fear in Ukraine to be found naked after Russian missile strike. Actually, I didn't plan to write this book, but now we have it with Hanna, and I wrote 40 stories. And after the first woman came the second one, and the third one, and others. And all my women are nameless, and I guess this fact makes my women stories universal, because every reader in every country can imagine themselves in my women shoes. And now I guess I would propose to read, and I would like to start from the very first story.
Which is from your personal experience, right?
About a woman who was afraid going to bed naked. Жінка, яку одного разу повітряна тривога застала у ванні, найбільше боялася померти ось так, без трусів, голою, з мокрою головою та неголеними ногами. Боялася, що рятувальники, які діставатимуть її з-під завалів, побачать її біле, кілька років без відпустки і моря через пекельну роботу тіло, з виразним целюлітом на стегнах і м'яким обвислим животом, який вона навчилася втягувати коригуючою білизною, і подумають: ну хто ж так готується до смерті, могла хоча б схуднути і кілька місяців у спортзал походити, ну? Боялася, що сусіди, яким пощастить вижити, стоятимуть біля руїн і обговорюватимуть її облізлий манікюр і відрослі сиві корені волосся. А бабця, яка завжди бризкала слиною їй у спину, коли вона, щаслива і трохи п'яна, випурхувала з великої чорної машини і легенько махала водію пальчиками на прощання, скаже: невже не можна було подумати передчасно, як ти виглядатимеш на тому світі? Моя Ірочка собі такого неподобства ні за що би не дозволила, царство їй небесне. Жінка відчайдушно боялася смерті, тому завжди вдягала на вулицю найдорожчу, наймережевнішу білизну та найпразничніший одяг. Але купатися в одязі – це як мінімум тупо. Тому ванна стала для неї недоступною розкішшю. Швидкий душ за 2 хвилини, слава бойлеру, гарячий душ. Але що можна встигнути за 2 хвилини? Навіть тіло не встигає зігрітися і відтанути. І вдень, коли вона вперше здалася, залізла в ванну з пінкою, яка пахла океаном, тропічними фруктами і всіма просраними відпустками Евер, її ненависть вихлюпнулась на підлогу і потекла до сусідів унизу, роз'їдаючи кахлі й бетон. А жінці, яка завжди найбільше боялася померти ось так, без трусів, голою, з мокрою головою та неголеними ногами, було байдуже, бо вона вже нічого не боялася.
The woman who was once caught by the air raid siren while she was taking a bath was most afraid of dying like that, without her panties, naked, with wet hair and hairy legs. Afraid that the first responders who would pull her from the rubble would see her white body with cellulite prominent on her thighs and a soft, sagging belly she learned to pull in with corrective underwear and think, who prepares for death like that? She could have at least lost a few pounds and worked out for a few months. Afraid that her neighbors who'd be lucky enough to survive would stand next to the ruins and discuss her chipped manicure and grown-out grey roots and the old woman who'd always talked behind her back with froth at her mouth when she, happy and tipsy, fluttered out of the black car and waved goodbye to the driver, would say, couldn't she give some thought to how she'd look in the other world? My dear Irochka would have never made such a mess of herself, may her soul rest in peace. The woman was so desperately afraid of death that she made sure to put on the most expensive, laciest lingerie and the most festive clothes whenever she went out. But taking a bath with clothes on was stupid, to say the very least. The bathing became an inaccessible luxury for her, only a quick 2-minute shower, hot shower, plus the water heater. But what could you do in 2 minutes? It was too little time for her body to warm up and thaw. And on the day when she finally gave up and got into a bathtub, full of foam, smelling like the ocean, tropical fruit, and all the fucked up vacations, her hatred splashed on the floor and trickled to her neighbors downstairs, eating through tiles and concrete. But the woman who had always been so scared of dying like that, without her panties, naked, with wet hair and hairy legs, no longer cared about it. She had no fear anymore.
The next story I'm going to read is my personal story, and it's about the woman who left her home. And as you know, many Ukrainian women left their homes with their children. And at the same time, a lot of Ukrainian women stayed in Ukraine with their children. And nobody knows which decision is correct. Жінка, яка залишила свій дім сірого лютневого ранку з сонним сином, кішкою та 2 парами трусів у наплічнику, щодня замість сніданку, обіду та вечері їла себе саму. Вона відрізала шматочок себе і кришила в борщ разом із картоплею і капустою із німецького супермаркету та одинокою цибулиною з турецького магазину. Пірамідки чумак тут не було, тому жінка додавала замість неї італійський соус. Борщ не солила, вона і так забагато плакала. Вона відрізала шматочок себе і варила суп з фрикадельками з біом'яса європейських індичок. Але жодного разу суп не вийшов таким, як удома. Бо в жінки не було дому. Вона відрізала шматочок себе і присмачувала ним пасту карбонара. І весь час згадувала смак макаронів ювілейні з дешевої ядки біля метро. Половина. Ось що лишилось від неї через півроку. Жінка щодня їла себе за те, що поїхала. А інша жінка, по той бік кордону, щодня їла себе за те, що лишилася.
The woman who left her home on a gray February morning with her sleepy son, her cat, and 2 pairs of underwear in her backpack was eating herself for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She would cut off a piece of herself and chop it into a pot of borscht along with potato and cabbage from a German supermarket and a lonely onion from a Turkish grocery store. In her new country, the little pyramids of chumak tomato sauce were not available, so the woman added Italian sauce instead. She did not add salt to the borscht. She was crying way too much anyway. She would cut off a piece of herself and make meatball soup with the organic meat of European turkeys. But her soup never tasted like it did back home because the woman had no home. She would cut off a piece of herself and add it to the spaghetti carbonara. Meanwhile, she'd be thinking of the taste of cheap pasta sold in a kiosk next to the metro station. A half. That was what was left of her in half a year. The woman was eating herself every day for her decision to leave. Another woman on the other side of the border was eating herself every day for her decision to stay.
Жінка, яка маскувала чорну діру всередині, щоранку фарбувала губи червоним. Вона ніколи не користувалася помадою такого кольору до війни, але в березні купила аж 5 тюбиків різних відтінків: яскраво-червоний, морквяно-червоний, цегляно-червоний, винно-червоний, рожево-червоний. Щодня у будні зранку жінка вибирала колір помади, наче збиралася носити його весь день на роботі. Тільки от роботу її розбомбили ще в лютому. І жінка, нашвидкоруч невміло нафарбувавши губи, бігла до підвалу. У підвалі було напівтемно, тож ніхто не бачив, що жінчин рот був намальований навдивовижу криво. Ліва половинка верхньої губи була ширшою і несиметричною справою. Помада розтеклася і розмазалася у кутиках, немов цей кривавий рот перекосило від болю. Якщо в підвалі доводилося сидіти довго, жінка діставала помаду і підфарбовувала губи навпомацки. Коли зацвіли каштани і обстріли міста стали менш інтенсивними, на лавки біля багатоповерхівок повернулися пліткарки. Вони усміхалися жінці, коли та йшла в магазин чи за гуманітаркою, а потім шепотіли в спину. Знову ця губи червоним намазала, а чоловік же їй ще в березні безвісти пропав, чули? І новин з тих пір так і нема, а в цієї ні стида, ні совісті. Пліткарки, які точно знали, як правильно горювати, обурено плювали на землю і переключалися на наступного перехожого.
The woman who was covering up a black hole inside her applied red lipstick every morning. Before the war, she had never used this color, but in March, she bought 5 lipsticks at once in different shades: bright red, carrot red, brick red, wine red, rose red. Every workday morning, she chose the color of lipstick as if she would wear it all day in the office. Only her office had been bombed in February, and the woman hastily applied lipstick and hurried down to the basement. The basement was gloomy, so no one could see that the woman's lips were uneven. The left half of her upper lip was wider and asymmetrical when compared to the right half. Lipstick was smeared in the corners, as if this blood-stained mouth was contorted in pain. When the woman had to sit in the basement for a long time, she pulled out her lipstick and reapplied it in the dark. When the chestnuts blossomed and the shelling subsided, the gossip mongers returned to their places on the benches next to the apartment blocks. They smiled at the woman as she went to the grocery store or to get humanitarian aid, then whispered behind her back, "She caked on her red lipstick again, and her husband has been missing since March, you know that? There's been no news since then, and this one, she has no shame." The gossip mongers, who knew exactly how one should mourn, spat on the ground in indignation and switched to the next passerby.
The next story was the story about the woman from Mariupol, but now, unfortunately, it might be also the story about women from Vovchansk, from Bakhmut, and many other Ukrainian cities, towns, and villages which were destroyed by Russians. Жінка, яка боялася спати, щоночі бачила місто, якого більше немає. Колись вона любила ніч. Любила, коли її нічне місто набувало невидимих удень магічних рис. Світло ліхтарів м'яко розрізало темряву, наче шоколадний торт, і все навколо. Тисячі разів виходжені вулиці, знайомі будинки, старі покручені дерева в парку, та й навіть вона сама здавалося покращеною версією денного варіанту. Удень сонце безжалісно підсвічувало всі недоліки: ями на асфальті, порепану штукатурку на стінах, обрубані гілки дубів, глибокі зморшки на обличчі, а щоночі ставалося диво. Колись жінка любила ніч, а тепер вона її ненавиділа. Антидепресанти, виписані психіатром, допомагали заснути, але не рятували від кошмарів. Місто, якого більше не було, мучило її, наче невиліковна хвороба, наче фантомні болі від втраченої кінцівки. Усе, побачене там наживо, поверталося у снах. Жінка хворіла містом, хворіла його чорними випаленими будинками, які витріщалися у вічність сліпими вікнами, хворіла його мертвими, які лежали на вулицях і в братських могилах, хворіла його болем, його відчаєм і його безнадією. Жінка котилася вперед за інерцією, мов м'яч, не знаючи, як пережити кожну наступну ніч. Час, який мав лікувати, лише загримовував її рани. Місто, якого більше не було, проростало у ній метастазами.
The woman who was scared of sleeping dreamt every night of a city that no longer existed. She used to love the night. She loved it when her nocturnal city took on magical properties that were invisible during the day. The glow from the streetlights cut softly through the darkness as if it were a chocolate cake, and everything around her, the streets she had walked up and down 1,000 times, the old gnarled trees in the park, and she herself looked like enhanced daytime versions. During the day, the sun mercilessly illuminated every flaw, potholes, chipped plaster on the walls, chopped off oak branches, deep wrinkles on her face. But every night, a miracle happened. The woman used to love the night, but now she hated it. The antidepressants prescribed by her psychiatrist helped her fall asleep, but did not save her from the nightmares. The city that no longer existed tormented her like an incurable disease, like phantom pains of a lost limb. Everything she had seen there with her own eyes returned later in her dreams. The woman was sick with the city. She was sick with its black, burned buildings, whose blind windows stared into eternity, sick with its dead lying in the streets and in mass graves, sick with its pain, despair, and hopelessness. The woman rolled forward through her inertia like a ball, not knowing how to survive another night. Time, which was supposed to heal, only concealed her wounds. The city that no longer existed sprouted metastasis inside her.
About the next story, I can also say that this is my personal story, and it's about body reaction after experiencing of explosions. Жінка, яка впала обличчям у землю після вибуху феєрверку в тихому європейському місті, спіймала флешбеки. Вона ніби знову лежала на клумбі перед власним під'їздом, намагаючись втиснути своє тіло в ямку, що залишилася після того, як минулої осені хтось викопав і вкрав трояндовий кущ. Троянда була чайною і щоліта ніжно пахла під вікнами, але ямка від неї була занадто малою, щоб умістити увесь жінчин страх. Вона ніби знову повзла біля шкільного стадіону, не добігши якихось кілька десятків метрів до школи. Оновлений стадіон після реконструкції урочисто відкрили у вересні, а вже в лютому школа перетворилася на бомбосховище. Коли прилетіла в сусідній зі школою будинок, жінка перестала чути на ліве вухо. Вона ніби знову сиділа в коридорі евакуаційного потяга, який в суцільній темряві виїздив із вокзала. Гул ворожих літаків над ним сплівся в одну кошмарну мелодію з плачем дітей та виттям котів усередині. Жінка скорчобилась і притисла коліна до грудей, намагаючись зайняти якомога менше місця, щоб вивільнити хоч кілька сантиметрів для тих, хто стояв у холодному тамбурі. Жінка не бачила здивованих поглядів людей, які разом із дітьми прийшли подивитися феєрверк на честь свята. Вона просто рятувала своє життя.
The woman who fell face down on the ground after a fireworks display in a quiet European town experienced a series of flashbacks. It was as if she were lying on the flower bed in front of an apartment building again, trying to squeeze her body into a pit left after someone had dug out and stolen a rose bush last fall. The tea rose bloomed under her window every summer, giving off a delicate fragrance, but the pit it left behind was too small to contain the woman's anguish. It was as if she were crawling past the school football field again. She'd been running toward the school, but had to give up a near dozen yards away from it. The football field reopened in September after the reconstruction, while in February, the school turned into a bomb shelter. The woman had lost hearing in her left ear after a missile hit a building right next to the school. It was as if she were sitting again in the aisle of an evacuation train, leaving the station in pitch darkness. The hum of enemy jets overhead, the crying of babies, and the howling of cats blended into a nightmarish melody. The woman crouched down, hugging her knees and trying to take up as little space as possible to free up at least a few more inches for those standing in the cold vestibule. The woman did not notice the surprised looks of the people who had brought their children to watch the festive fireworks. She was just trying to save her life.
Жінка, яка повернулася в зруйноване село, плакала над скелетом корови. Ціле життя тому, в один із лютневих втомлених вечорів, коли густа темрява чорнилом залила доми, вона лягла спати у своєму ліжку у своїй хаті. Десь високо над дахами купчилися темні хмари, а вітер стукав у шибку гілкою старого ще батьком посадженого горіха. Жінка вертілася під ковдрою, нарікаючи на погоду, від якої крутили коліна, та на власне безсоння. Корова стиха підмукувала в хліві, і жінка пішла перевірити, чому хвилюється худоба. Корова тягнула до неї голову і дивилася великими вологими очима. Жінка говорила щось заспокійливе і гладила лискучий пружний бік. А потім зачинила хлів і повернулася до хати. Гілку горіха, яка заважала заснути, вона підперла дошкою. Ще до світанку жінка прокинулася в іншій реальності. Десь за селом гриміло й гуркотіло щось не схоже на грозу. Жінка похапцем піднялася з дивана, відсунула штору і виглянула у вікно. Чорне небо палало загравою. На столі завібрував мобільник. Ніколи син не дзвонив їй так рано. У відповідь на її хрипке перелякане «Алло» син спокійно сказав, що почалась війна. Казав, що треба їхати, він уже домовився із сусідом. Тікати негайно, бо за кілька годин буде пізно. Як тікати? Куди? А корова? Видихнула жінка. Син лише голосно виматюкався. Тремтячими руками жінка відв'язала корову і хотіла вивести її до сінника. Та, почувши вибухи, тварина махнула головою, вирвала налигач і дерменула на город, задравши хвоста. Сусід, який уже завантажив у свій мікроавтобус дружину та 3 переляканих дітей, кричав за керма: «Тьоть Оль, швидше, не жуйте соплі, блядь, бо за вашої корови нам тут усім пиздець». Жінка шмигнула в машину і втягнула голову в плечі від нового вибуху. Сусід різко газонув. Жінка давилася слізьми і намагалася не схлипувати, щоб не перелякати дітей ще дужче. Світало, але небо продовжувало горіти. Вона повернулася додому, коли село звільнили через півроку окупації. Хата зустріла виваленою стіною, хлів перетворився на купу цегли та дощок. Те, що залишилось від корови, лежало біля вигорілого сінника. Жінці хотілося вірити, що вона не дуже мучилась.
The woman who returned to the destroyed village wept over the skeleton of her cow. A whole lifetime ago, on one of those weary February nights when thick darkness spilled its ink over the houses, she went to sleep in her own bed, in her own house. Somewhere far above the rooftops, dark clouds crowded in, and the wind tapped her window with the branch of an old walnut tree her father had planted. The woman twisted and turned under the covers, complaining about the weather that made her knees ache and about her insomnia. The cow in the barn was mooing softly. The woman went out to see why she was restless. The cow stuck her head out and looked at her with her big, damp eyes. The woman said a few soothing words and stroked her smooth, elastic side. Then she closed the barn door and returned to the house. She propped up the branch of the walnut tree, which kept her awake, with a board. It was not even dawn when the woman woke up to another reality. A loud roar could be heard outside the village, which did not sound like a thunderstorm. The woman quickly got up, opened the curtain, and looked out the window. The black sky was aglow. Her cell phone vibrated on the table. Her son had never called her so early. To her coarse, frightened, "Hello?" he calmly replied that the war had begun. He told her she had to leave and that he had already arranged this with their neighbor. She should leave immediately because in a few hours it would be too late. Leave? But where am I supposed to go? And what about the cow? The woman gasped. Her son only cursed loudly. With trembling hands, the woman unleashed the cow and led her to the hayloft. But when the cow heard the explosions, she jerked her head, snatched the rope from the woman's hands, and ran toward the vegetable patch with her tail raised high. The neighbor, who had already packed his wife and 3 terrified children into his van, yelled at her from the steering wheel. "Aunt Oля, hurry, stop dawdling, or we'll all fucking die along with your damn cow." The woman quickly got into the van, cringing from another explosion. The neighbor hit the gas. The woman choked back her sobs, not to frighten the kids even more. Dawn was breaking, but the sky was still on fire. She returned home when her village was liberated after 6 months of occupation. Her house greeted her with a collapsed wall. The barn was just a pile of bricks and boards. What was left of her cow lay next to the burned hayloft. The woman wanted to believe that the cow had not suffered too much.
And the last story I'm going to read today describes the situation on Kharkiv railway station after full-scale invasion. Жінка, яка викинула валізу з потяга, спала, сидячи на підлозі в холодному тамбурі дорогою в нікуди. Коли почалася війна, вона вирішила будь-що залишитися у власному домі в місті, в яке вросла корінням від народження. Вибухи в перший день були як перший секс, несподівано, боляче і страшно. Жінка здригалася і втягувала голову в плечі, коли віконне скло вібрувало і дзвеніло. Наступного дня, після перших нот тривоги, вона, пригинаючись, вибігла з квартири і помчала до бомбосховища у школі. Сидячи в напівтемряві, жінка рахувала глухі удари. Здавалося, що це скажений велет лупить кувалдою по землі. Першу ніч у бомбосховищі жінка провела, скорцюбившись на маленькому стільчику. Хтось приніс із десяток таких з кабінету, де вчилися першачки. У ті хвилини, коли вона провалювалась у сон, їй снилася покинута оселя. Жінка плакала і обіцяла до неї повернутись. Вона так і зробила через кілька днів, відчуваючи, що божеволіє від замкнутого простору підвалу, над яким стоїть велет з кувалдою. Переступивши поріг квартири, жінка сказала самій собі, що краще вже помре тут, але більше нікуди не піде. Але вночі, коли вона лежала, закутавшись у кілька ковдр серед 2 стін, полетіли літаки. І жінка зрозуміла, що раніше не знала геть нічого про тваринний страх. Зранку жінка, яка за ніч не склепила очей, скидала в рожеву валізу перше, що трапилося під руку: флісові штани, 2 літні сукні, флакон парфумів, диплом з якогось конкурсу, улюблену чашку та купу інших непотрібних речей, які першими хапають люди у хвилини найбільшого стресу. Документи та гроші вона поклала в маленьку поясну сумочку. По одному з телеграм-каналів вона знайшла телефон таксиста, котрий передавали з рук у руки, мов священний грааль. Таксист погодився відвести її до вокзалу за шалені гроші. Жінка його не засуджувала, таксисту теж було страшно. Людське море на вокзалі підхопило її і понесло. Жінка відчайдушно вчепилася за рожеву валізу, як за єдиний уламок колишнього життя. Коли увечері подали евакуаційний потяг, натовп оскаженів. Жінку з валізою відкинуло майже під колеса, але вона встигла вхопитися вільною рукою за поручень. Вивертаючись усім тілом, вона змогла залізти на кілька сходинок, але валіза, затиснута між людьми, не давала їй рухатись далі. І тоді жінка розтисла білі від холоду й напруги пальці, відпускаючи в прірву минуле життя. Над вокзалом полетіли літаки, і жінку за кілька секунд внесло у вагон. Потяг рушив. Плакали діти, кричали дорослі й коти. Жінка мовчала. Вона слухала, як тріщить і ламається, вириваючись із землі її коріння.
The woman who had thrown her suitcase off the train sat sitting on the floor in the cold vestibule on the way to nowhere. When the war broke out, she decided to stay, no matter what, in her home in the city where she had put down roots since her birth. The explosions on the first day were like first attacks, unexpected, painful, and frightening. The woman shook and doubled over as the window panes vibrated and rattled. The next day, after the first sounds of the air raid siren, she ran out of her apartment and rushed to the school's bomb shelter with her head down. Sitting in the semi-darkness, the woman counted the thumps. It seemed like a mad giant was sledgehammering against the ground. The woman spent her first night in the bomb shelter huddled on a small chair. Someone had brought a dozen of them from the first grade classroom. When she sank briefly into a deep sleep, she dreamed of her abandoned house. The woman cried and promised that she would return. That's exactly what she did a few days later, when she felt like she was losing her mind in the enclosed space of the basement, a giant with a sledgehammer hovering above it. As she stepped over the threshold of her apartment, the woman told herself that she would not go anywhere, even if she died there. But that night, as she lay wrapped in several blankets between two walls, the planes came, and the woman realized that she had known nothing about primal fear. In the morning, the woman who had not slept a wink that night threw the first things she could grab into her pink suitcase: fleece sweats, 2 summer dresses, a bottle of perfume, a certificate she'd received in a competition, a favorite mug, and a bunch of other unnecessary things that people reached for first in the most stressful moments. She packed the documents and cash into a small fanny pack. On the Telegram channel, she found the cab driver's phone number, passed from one person to another like a holy grail. The cab driver said he could take her to the station for a crazy fee. The woman did not judge him. The driver was also scared. At the station, the human sea picked her up and carried her away. The woman desperately clutched her suitcase as if it was the only fragment of her former life. When the evacuation train pulled onto the platform that night, the crowd went nuts. They almost pushed the woman with the suitcase under the wheels, but she managed to hold on to the railing with her free hand. With a twist of her whole body, she was able to climb a few steps, but the suitcase, caught between people's bodies, would not let her go any further. Then the woman loosened her fingers, which had turned white from cold and tension, and let her previous life plunge into the abyss. The planes flew over, and a few seconds later, the crowd pushed the woman into the train car. The train departed. The children were crying, the adults, the cats screaming. The woman was silent. She heard her roots crack and snap, breaking free from the soil.
Thank you very much for your readings, and Hanna, for your translation. And by the way, I should mention Hanna was very, when she talked about Ansley Morse's quote, she said that they were beautifully translated by Hanna Leliv, but you cut that out. But I want to say that, yeah, I mean, reading and hearing these stories, it's like, you know, receiving like this devastating blow. Sometimes, even though the stories are so short, it feels like a whole life is captured in one text. Horrific experiences, which are sometimes matter-of-factly presented, make it even more so powerful in that sense. So thank you for finding a way to express these emotions in this book. My question is, start about talking about format, and this is what I've been asking several authors that have been visiting us here in Harriman over the last 2 years or so. And we just talked about this with Ostap Slavinsky last Thursday. You know, people are trying to find new formats of discussing of these emotions, of these experiences of living in war. you know, like you mentioned, you would write your own poetry on Facebook, and there was a lot of people doing that early on. A lot of essays were written earlier. I put out a book of essays to kind of capture, you know, these people telling the world about Ukraine and things like that. Then you had Ostap's book, which is, you know, stories heard and or sent to him from people from all over Ukraine, overheard at the Lviv train station mostly. How do you choose this particular format, this flash fiction, it's called, right? Is this a genre that you worked in before, or you read some other writer working for it? And why do you think this was the way to tell these stories as opposed to a poem or a longer text? How did you get about choosing this format?
You know, I guess that wartime is the time for short forms because you never know will you be able to finish your big prose project like a novel. Nobody knows. And that's why in Ukraine poetry is very popular now, and we have many new names in Ukrainian poetry, and a lot of them at the moment are fighting on the front line, like. Artur Dronь, like Valery Puzik, and also Maxim Krivtsov, who was killed in January this year, and his first poetry book was just published in December 2022. And he was my close friend, and he was very happy to have his first poetry book published. But in 3 weeks, I guess, he was killed by Russians, and I know that he had another project, not only poetry, but he also was working on a novel, but he will never finish it. That's why I guess wartime is time for short forms like prose and flash fiction, like poetry and flash fiction.
Yeah, and opening up the floor to any questions you have. One of the stories here touched upon, many of the stories touch upon things that I've been thinking about, and I'm sure a lot of people think about, you know, when they're thinking about this war and about Ukraine right now. But one of the things is the story on page 26. It was about a boy who just became an adult, and yeah, that really touched me and got me thinking too about, you know, this whole generation, this generation of kids right now in Ukraine, and like, you know, Stop's poetry often he has. Children are very important in poetry because they offer a certain point of view that we as adults, as a society, need, right? And I'm just trying to think, you know, you have these children who their childhood's stolen, the children themselves have been stolen and kidnapped. You know, they've reduced presence of their fathers, these broken families, and orphans, displaced. What do you think the impact of having this just lost almost not a whole generation, but this several years of children not having this childhood, the effect that's going to have on this kind of balance in society, you know, how we need one another. Are you feeling that now from just like from reading text, from corresponding, from knowing what's happening in Ukraine, how is that noticeable? Is it too early yet? That, you know, that this childhood is basically is gone for a certain age.
Well, I can say that Russians just stole our lives, and I also have a son. He is almost 12 now, And now we are separated from my husband, from his father, and we live in different countries. And my son doesn't see his father for months, and it's terrible, and it's not normal. And even if he is almost well, he often cries in the evenings, and he wants to come back that time before the full scale invasion, but he is still a child, and he still doesn't understand that it's impossible, unfortunately.
Any questions from anybody in the room? I have a question to Hanna, the translator. As we see, Yulia's English is very good. So I'm going to ask, when you were translating these stories, did you consult a lot with the author, or did you guys work completely separately? How did you approach these texts, translating these texts?
So I'm grateful for Yulia's trust, actually, because Yulia trusted, like completely entrusted the translation into my hands. And we did not really consult, but Yulia had a chance to read all the translations, and I was always asking these things that I managed to convey the message and the wisdom. And I'm happy to incorporate, any comments that you might have. I did work with an editor from the publishing house, which was also helpful because there was someone completely outside the Ukrainian context, completely outside of that reality. Sometimes like we would discuss some passages, which I, as someone who is, deeply immersed in Ukrainian context, would probably think that, well, this will be clear to anyone, but then there would be some questions. So what did you mean here? Or what was the concept? Maybe it's worth unpacking it a little bit. So it was very helpful to have this, back and forth. My main goal when translating these stories was to preserve the emotional intensity and the laconic style, so as not to prettify, not to expand, not to, unpack too many, like where it's not necessary, but try to keep this, gut punching effect, I would say.
Yeah, it's certainly there. Yeah.
And also some of these stories, like at least to me, they felt like cinematic almost. Like you can vividly imagine, like just like moment by moment, what is happening. Or some of them felt like these vivid snapshots of reality, just shots from movies. So I wanted to make sure that it feels like that in English as well.
Thank you. Any questions in the public? Yes.
Oh, I have a comment, like just overall, and I look forward to reading more of the stories. But yeah, it was very powerful how you said like how it creates like a cinematic experience, or just like shots of it, especially like the story of Kharkiv, just from like my experience of taking people to the evacuation train, dropping them off, and seeing all of that, and yeah, like my comment was just that it was very powerfully captured.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, I noticed in one of the stories we translators from Ukrainian always have to figure out what do we do with the loaded terms Vyshyvanka and Rushnik, right?
Yeah.
And so you used it in the Ukrainian version, and then later you kind of explained it, right? You said,
what was that?
Her embroidered shirt, the Vyshyvanka, on page 49, right?
Yeah.
And then embroidered towel. So sometimes you translate, sometimes you don't. Yeah, I know it's always an issue. And then you footnoted, you try to explain. I mean, you offer paragraphs to explain it.
Yeah,
Nick.
in that particular case, I glossed the Shivanka, the embroidered shirt. What was important to me as well was not to italicize it.
Yeah.
So that not to exoticize it, not to other it, because then we have a question of like, why the words borrowed, I don't know, like from Spanish or from other language, are not italicized, but Ukrainian, some concepts or words should be authored in the text. And I think that now in the translation community, we have this push against italicizing and authoring, but rather, trying to bring these words into English, like to expand the target language
Mhm,
rather than being intentional, like, oh, this is something, different on the page. But, speaking about things that are hard to translate, sometimes like in this story about the woman who was eating herself, we have this little pyramids of chumak tomato sauce.
Right.
It's not just, chumak tomato sauce and then just random tomato sauce that you would just use. It's a whole concept for us, I think. It's something very, specifically very Ukrainian thing. And chumak sauce is produced in Kherson, which was occupied up until last summer. And so there is some kind of, deeper context behind it. So clearly this woman, maybe she was from Kherson, and it was like almost like a part of home for her.
Yeah, and it's such a big part of daily life. I mean, every store you go to, you see a Chimok product, basically. So it's such, everyday Ukrainian life. It's the normality of life, that's gone. Yes, Daniel.
Beyond cultural references, what were some other things, aspects of these stories that were hard to translate? What other difficulties did you run into with regards to the translation of Yulia's collection?
Specifically about cultural references.
I think you said beyond culture. Beyond culture.
Beyond
Let's talk about fair.
No, well, I think that the biggest task for me as a translator was to make sure that these stories resonate emotionally, first of all. That when you read them in English, you get the same emotional feeling as when you read them in Ukrainian. So that was the main challenge for me. Sometimes I would revise like one sentence, many times, like tightening it up, trying to make it more laconic, more emotionally intense, just to make sure that this emotional effect is there.
And that's so hard to do because translating from Ukrainian to English usually use more words in English
Yeah,
than in
exactly.
Ukrainian, and that's such a major characteristic of these texts I could see that being a challenge. Yeah.
Exactly, yes, like you go back, especially on the editing stage, you go back and you tighten things up and then you cut, like, are there any like unnecessary words that I can cut? Can I rework the syntax of the sentence to make it like shorter, to foreground the most important message? And so lots of cutting, lots of tightening, lots of going back and forth.
I see. So like compression, that was like probably the hard. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Until you said flash fiction, I actually thought this was like very poetic nonfiction. So really, I mean, for an American, like my response to it was like it really illuminates like the experiences people had. It kind of reminds the book I bought as I'm trying to learn language. It's a Yuliia Iliukha war. It's in Ukrainian, and I could read a little bit, but it's really these powerful vignettes of the first like 6 hours for several women. So it reminded me. That's why I thought this was nonfiction, and really like brought home what people were experiencing. But my question is, as for Ukrainian audience, like people who are you're living it, what is a reaction they might have, or what's the response you might be looking for in that audience?
Actually, Ukrainian edition of My Women just came out last week. But unfortunately, I can't show it to you because I had only one copy and I gave it as a present to my American publisher.
And it's a bilingual edition, and it's illustrated
Mhm.
by all women illustrators, right?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
completely women's project.
And who's the publisher?
Yuliia
Uh-huh.
Iliukha, which is also women-owned business, so it's like, women all around. I think that but can I also respond to that? Yeah. My feeling would be that the effect of this book for Ukrainian audience and for an Anglophone or other foreign readers will be different. Because, well, I can speak for myself, as you know, I'm a native Ukrainian, and I find so many moments in these stories that really resonate with me. And for example, in this short story where the woman, in the final one, where the woman tosses like a certificate into her suitcase or some just random clothes or some random stuff. If you if you do not live in that reality, you never had, thank God, to pack, a grab-go bag and just leave. You would think, but it's not true. It doesn't sound realistic. Why would she throw some random stuff? If it's a matter of life and death, you would probably, pack some important things. When the war when the invasion, when the full-scale invasion broke out, I was in Lviv, and I was home. And, on that first day of the war, we did not know at all what is going to happen. So I also packed my own, small suitcase. And the first thing that I put in that suitcase was not like documents or cash or really some important stuff. No, it was, for some reason, decided to pack my two most fanciest dresses that I bought a couple of weeks before because I completely irrationally, in that moment, I thought, if Russians come here, I would regret that I have these two beautiful dresses and they will get them. So there is no logic in this. It just, some irrational emotional decisions. So I know that this is true, what's written here, but someone who is completely outside the context, who's never been in that situation, they would say, well, it's just, just pure fiction. People do not behave like this.
It's amazing how that term, the go bag, the raptovo sumka, is inundating so much of Ukrainian literature in the last 2.5 years. It's become really a major word that's used constantly.
Yeah.
In various works.
And also, if I may add one more comment, to me, again, as someone who is deeply immersed in what's going on in my home country, this book is also a snapshot of the whole 2022, the year 2022. It has you can place this book that, it's primarily about that particular year and the months what was happening there. It's not the snapshot of reality, let's say in 2024 or even late 2023. It somehow is, you somehow feel that it's that time when you experience that.
Any more questions? If
I have
not,
some comments.
okay, please.
I'm from the same city. We used to work together back in Kharkiv many years ago. And my mother's sister, she still lives in Kharkiv. She left Kharkiv for some time. She moved to Germany and she went back. And the story about woman that took a train. I didn't know this story, and I know Yuliia doesn't know the story of my mom's sister, but this is exactly. I feel related, and my family feel related because this is what my aunt told us. And for American readers, it might be not making so much sense about taxi driver, cab driver, because you can get to the train station. Why it's so expensive? It was in the story that he charged tremendous amount of money. It was a big problem because to travel to train station because of debris everywhere, not only because of bombing, but because of debris, cars couldn't go. And only very brave drivers were given rights to people who tried to escape from Kharkiv.
Mhm, mhm,
And thank you very much for this story.
mhm.
Yeah, when I heard that with her reaction to the cab driver charging, it seemed like almost like a simple, like you would expect, like, oh, I'm outraged, or how could you, but there's more like a sympathy, and it seemed like it just really captured like all the fear, everyone's fear was just, it was just sharing it, there was no room for animosity, it was like, I understand completely, it's really, like her tenderness at that moment was really,
Mhm.
And Kharkiv these days, if you want to, wrap up talk like was the metaphor, I think the metaphor for Ukrainian literature and cultural life today is, this Kharkiv publisher Alexander Savchuk, who is still in Kharkiv and has been there, all the like ever since the invasion started. He has a little bookstore and a press, and the windows in his bookstore, he stacked his books against the windows of his bookstore, like to protect the bookstore from the from the missiles and the windows shattering. And I think this is such a sad metaphor of these days.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, I want to thank both of you for your readings, for your translations, for your writings. This is a very powerful book. I recommend everybody get a copy of it and get an autograph. Thank you all for coming for discussion, and congratulations on a very important book. Дякую.
Thank you.
Дякую.
Thank you so much.
Possible to buy a copy like through Zelle?
Yes, actually I have QR codes that go like straight to